These are some of the greatest gardens in Britain. From a ducal castle to a garden once lost in time. From a modern masterpiece to a plantsman's paradise. We've searched out the finest in the land. Each has its own unique story to tell.
Oh, it's delightful.
Join me, Carol Klein, on a journey through the 4 seasons.
Woo!
As I experience a year in their lives. Meet the people who look after them.
This is the season which seems to be attached to my soul.
This is my midlife crisis bit, really.
Glimpse what goes on behind the scenes.
Come on, share your secrets.
Reflect on their magnificent designs and celebrate the plants that make each so special.
As I look through these massive pinnacles of flower, I can see the pinnacles themselves. Serendipity.
From up and down the land, these are great British gardens, waiting to be discovered.
I'm really looking forward to it. Bet you are too.
This is the story of a garden that's seen nearly 230 years of evolution. Since the 18th century, it's been home to 6 generations of the same family. And for the last 20 years has been under the stewardship of the 7th, Elizabeth Murray, and her husband Ross. Their 18 acres of majestic gardens and parkland lie on the eastern edge of the Brecon Beacons National Park in Monmouthshire, close to the picturesque market town of Abergavenny. Change has flowed through Llanover Gardens as inevitably as the cascades and rills of the stream that race to join the River Usk.
Today, it's one of the best acclaimed gardens in the whole of Wales. This is my very first visit, so I'm longing to see it for myself.
It's a garden I've never set foot in. It rarely opens to the public, and even more rarely to television cameras. I'm fascinated to see how successive generations have made their mark upon the artful landscaping and exceptional plants, including the trees.
There's so much to find out about here, but one thing's for sure, I could not have chosen a better season to start my visits here than the autumn.
And there's no better place to start than the approach itself.
Could you imagine a grander entrance to any estate than this magnificent avenue of sweet chestnuts? You often see great avenues of trees on the approach to grand houses, but they're almost invariably limes, so this is particularly unusual. Castagna sativa, the Latin name for the sweet chestnut, is really a tree of the Mediterraneans. It was the Romans who introduced it in Italy. But I suppose most people's acquaintance with the sweet chestnut is through these wonderful nuts. I know my husband loves roasting them on the fire and doesn't consider it's Christmas without them. But just look at the wonderful way in which they've evolved. As with most fruits and berries, they've evolved to make sure that their fruit will eventually make another tree. So around the nuts, you've got this wonderful sort of prickly outer coating. It's really quite painful. And I defy any hungry herbivore to take a munch at this. You just wouldn't do it. But when they're ripe and they fall to the ground, they open up. 1 or 2 of them are bound to germinate somewhere or other. So the next generation is guaranteed.
If you love trees, then this is the place for you. The Sweet Chestnut Avenue runs along the drive, parallel to the Upper Arboretum, which is home to some of the garden's remarkable trees. Beneath the canopy of the upper arboretum runs a stream, the Riddy Merk, which provides the backbone to a ribbon of historic gardens. But this is no rustic brook, it's an artfully landscaped waterway, with arched bridges, tranquil ponds, islands, and a sluice. It was the vision of the garden's founder, Benjamin Waddington, who bought and transformed this land more than 200 years ago. He also created the round garden, which includes an ancient dovecot and glorious deep herbaceous borders within a sheltering curved wall. Behind this spectacular centrepiece is a new bog garden, before the stream continues through formal lawns and the rare trees of the lower arboretum and the lower wet meadow. At the centre, the splendid Georgian features of Llanover House preside over sweeping parkland views, looking out towards the Black Mountains beyond. Today, Llanover House is home to Benjamin Waddington's descendant, Elizabeth, and her husband, Ross.
I think this just has to be the most incredible view, even on a wet Welsh day. I mean, what we're seeing now is the work of all sorts of people from, what, 200 plus years ago?
Yeah, well, way back in sort of about 1790, Benjamin Waddington came over from Nottinghamshire. He'd been very successful as a businessman trading with America, and then we invested in the Monmouthshire to Brecon Canal.
Did he start the garden?
And he's definitely started gardening.
Yeah.
What he bought was a farmhouse with a stream running through farmland. And we know that he wrote to the Brecon and Monmouthshire Canal sort of board and asked that they should stop extracting so much water from the stream because he wanted to enjoy it for himself and also for his livestock.
Right, and it's a very, very vital part. In fact, it's the lifeblood of the garden, isn't it, now, that water?
It determines the character, the shape, and a lot of the planting in the garden nowadays.
Mr. Waddington had an eye for improvements. With streams 10 a penny in the damp valleys of Wales, he decided to turn his into something more refined.
What I love about it is they're various cascades, and he placed stones to add movement and more sound, and there's little steps, and I just think the fact that they've been here over 200 years is incredible.
So as you look out this way and you just see all these splendid trees, they represent generations of planting, don't they?
Yes, and that just from here we can see, the plane trees planted by Benjamin Waddington.
This is the biggest of them, is it?
Yes, yes. No, this one is absolutely enormous.
I can hardly look up enough. So every morning you can look out of your window and you can see this splendid tree.
Yeah, it's absolutely fantastic. So it's enormous. There's 8 planted by Waddington in about 1790, but this is by far the largest because those are the old farm buildings behind you.
Yeah.
And the slurry from them sort of flows underneath these roots and certainly fed the tree and it's thrived.
Instant liquid fertiliser, yeah?
Absolutely perfect. And I think one of the reasons that Waddington planted 8 of them was they'd been introduced to Britain earlier on in the 18th century. And as he was planting up this garden, why not use some of the new introductions?
It's a way of saying, yes, you saw them here first.
Look at me, look at my garden.
Waddington's stately London plains may have secured him a grand reputation, but he'd also planted the seed of a family tradition, an enduring appreciation of trees. My only previous acquaintance with this garden is through Elizabeth's father, Robin Herbert, former president of the Royal Horticultural Society. He's renowned for his knowledge of trees.
He had an American grandmother, so when his parents had passed away, he lived with his grandmother, who used to send him to America most summers, and came back with a real enthusiasm for the American fall, and therefore sort of concentrated on planting the acers, nissers, hickories, all those trees which give fantastic colour.
Robin wasn't the only one to be captivated by these richly coloured trees. Their incredible foliage, the very picture of the American fall.
I mean, I owe so much to my father for all the planting he did here and the knowledge he sort of passed on to me.
No wonder Elizabeth cherishes the trees at Llanover. With all the rare and distinguished examples here, it's a true treasure. I'm looking forward to meeting some of the stars of this autumnal show. It's autumn in Wales, and for Llanover Gardens there's an extravaganza of phenomenal foliage, thanks to the abundance of glorious trees.
Lots of acers are from America or from China and Japan, but this is an acer with a difference. It's called Acer cappadocica, and it comes from the mountains of Turkey. And it's renowned for this brilliant, brilliant autumn colour. In spring, it's bright and beautiful too. And even in the summer, it has a yellowish tinge. But it's at this time of year that it really comes into its own. Now, I don't like yellow and pink at all. But here, there's the most perfect combination of little pink-flowered cyclamen and the fallen leaves of the acer. You can't beat nature, can you?
Incredibly, these gardens are tended by only 2 people, despite their imposing size and history. Elizabeth herself and her head gardener. As if that wasn't challenge enough, Nick Carnell has only been in the role for a couple of months. So how does a professional gardener approach a new garden, especially one as imbued with tradition as Llanover?
It's hard at work, Nick.
Yes, yeah.
There's plenty to do, isn't there, at this time of year?
There's lots to do, yeah.
And how are you liking it so far?
Love it, it's beautiful. When I get moments to myself, I tend to have a good wander and a good daydream and start planning things.
There are so many very, very special plants here. So it's quite a responsibility to...
It is. It's a wonderful learning curve.
Yeah.
There are things that I'm finding out about that I didn't know. There are seeds that I'm seeing on trees and thinking about germinating and all those different things. And it's a garden where you can keep learning.
This is the bog garden.
It is.
Obviously. Evidently.
It's very wet underfoot at the moment.
But what are your plans here? I mean, are you just going to maintain it as it is, or...?
Initially, but there are a lot of gaps in the beds, so
Right.
It's working out something to put in them, something that's not going to take over, but is going to work within the setting. Because of the location, it's something everybody passes, and so it would be nice to get it working.
It's got to be dapper.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like the whole garden, it's a work in progress.
With progress at the fore, I think the garden's original creator, Benjamin Waddington, would have approved. It was he who laid out much of the ingenious landscaping here, and his descendants have picked up the baton and run with it. I'm about to get my first look at Elizabeth's take on one of the garden's most unique features, the spectacular round garden.
Oh, it's glorious. It's lovely. It really is. You couldn't have a more beautiful setting, could you?
This wonderful building is a clue to the garden's rich history.
And that dovecote is just out of this world.
That
How old is that?
dovecote was part of the original farm buildings.
Yeah.
And then when Waddington created this circular garden, he incorporated it within the walls of it.
Yeah, very sensible bloke, wasn't he? He had a bit of an eye.
He did.
And you obviously have too. I mean, this is glorious. And so much colour for autumn.
Well, I know, given that it's November,
It's rich, isn't it? I love the texture, actually. That's the first thing that strikes me, because there's such a, these lovely big leaves and then lots of seed heads and, real structure from this phlomis.
Her father's tree expertise has been an inspiration, but Elizabeth spotted an opportunity to make her own mark on the garden. She redesigned these borders with the help of top plantswoman Mary Payne.
When we moved here in 1999, as my father was such a tree man, this wasn't so good. Mary Payne came and gave a talk on minimum effort for maximum effect. And I thought, oh, goody, can you come and help me here? So she designed these borders. And once she'd done the planting plan, I saw all these bright yellows from the rudbeckias and the dahlias, and I thought, Mary, I don't like bright yellow. She said, Elizabeth, you need to have bright yellow to lift the browns of autumn. And she is so right.
Who wouldn't love to have a walled garden? But imagine having a stream to play with too. Elizabeth's ancestor, the Georgian Benjamin Waddington, saw the stream's potential to make an ingenious boundary for the garden.
Initially, it looks as though it goes full circle, but then something different happens over here.
It was such a clever plan because Waddington used the pond to form one of the arcs of the circle, and then the stream is running through the round garden.
You can hear the water now, and it's central to the whole thing, isn't it, the stream that runs through?
It links the whole garden together, and from every point you can hear water, even if you can't see it.
He's quite a clever bloke, wasn't he, Waddington?
I'm impressed.
Yeah, he knew what he was doing.
This garden has seen many changes in its long history, including Elizabeth's brilliant and sensitive additions. I'm delighted to have had my first look at it in autumn. I'll return next year. In the meantime, there'll be many more changes as the glow of autumn gives way to the vigour of the Welsh winter. As each generation takes on the care of these gardens, it leaves its mark on the place as well. New ideas meld with the Georgian features of the historic house, the magnificent trees, and above all, the Riddymerk stream.
The stream starts in Brecon Beacons National Park. It runs right through the garden from the southern end of the garden to the northern end, and then it flows on into the River Usk.
The stream shapes the geography and architecture of the garden, and that's never more apparent than during the winter.
It creates such a character. We can see it and enjoy it throughout the year, but I think in the winter it stands out even more because it's got a greater volume of water going through it.
But when that volume of rainwater is topped up by the Welsh winter storms, that's when you really learn what character means.
The ground was so waterlogged that it could not absorb any more water, and so the streams overflowed. It dropped all of the gravel and stones and big lumps of wood that it picked up on the way. And so over here, you can actually see where the soil has been washed away by the force of the water, and there's the exposed roots of the Cornus Kesselringiae. But on the whole, we've been really pleased at how well the various cornus and willow, which we've planted along the stream, have held on to the bank.
This is no happy accident. Elizabeth has deliberately planted water-loving trees on the edge of the stream's bank to stabilise it and retain it with their roots. And as an additional bonus, here in wintry Wales, these young trees also provide glorious winter colour. They're artfully pollarded willows, looking like explosive red lollipops. And now's the time to maintain their striking shape and fiery bark colour.
We'll give them all a full pollard, including this older one, and wait for the new growth to come up. So we've got some fresh, lush growth on top of them.
So, Nick, what do you think about planting a few more just to round off this arc?
I think if we take some of these sort of pencil width pieces that are nice and straight and put them to one side, and then we'll use those to reproduce some more willows like we've got here.
Willows are easy to propagate. Push stem cuttings into moist, well-drained soil. They'll soon take root. Best done during the winter so that roots can establish before the stems start producing buds.
Push that into the ground, about 6 inches, and off it will go.
And then in 5 years' time, you'll have,
something
another
like this.
lollipop just like that.
Just don't plant them too near buildings. Their water-loving roots will seek out moisture and may damage walls.
Right, there we go. And on to the next one.
No, we're not.
You can
We're
get
stuck
away.
in the mud.
I think we'll keep these and perhaps use them for something else at a later date. Maybe plant supports or something interesting. They're a very nice colour.
Many of the trees here come into their own during the winter, when their breathtaking form, colour and texture can be fully appreciated without the distraction of foliage. The low sun illuminates Acer griseum, the paperbark maple, its peeling Titian bark backlit to dramatic effect. Acer griseum comes from China, where the Victorian plant hunter Ernest Wilson collected its seeds before introducing it to Britain in 1901. Long after Benjamin Waddington created this garden, although I'm sure he'd have welcomed it. Also providing rich colour are the deep pink, goblet-like flowers of Magnolia campbellii, one of the earliest to flower of more than 60 magnolias in this garden. Many of these magnificent trees were planted here by Elizabeth's father, Robin Herbert.
You have to look at this magnolia again as you go over the bridge so you see. Can you see that's fantastic? Looking really good. I mean, when did he plant that? Must have been about 1960?
Now in his 80s, Robin still enjoys a tour of the garden with Elizabeth to see how his lifetime's passions are performing, adorning the garden with their spectacular beauty.
That couldn't have more flower on it, even if it tried, could it?
In the depths of winter, these trees are the stars of the show. But there's more to gardening with trees than cramming it with foliage and flowers. Sometimes what you take out is as important as what you put in. It's a code that Elizabeth's husband, Ross, has embraced with both safety-gloved hands.
Well, I am the chainsaw gardener, which always fills Elizabeth with dread when I get going, and winter is the season for the chainsaw gardener. My project this year, which I've been dreaming about for 20 years now, has been to restore the final acre at the bottom of the garden. And what we're doing is clearing away the laurel to allow us to have a woodland garden extension. The great thing is we'll be able to see that lovely Scots pine behind once we've got this cleared out. That's the effect that we want to achieve, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
Shall we go to it?
Laurel, with its glossy leaves and vigorous habit, is often used for hedging. On country estates, it used to be planted as cover for pheasants, but it grows fast and it grows big. Today, Ross has his sights aimed squarely on opening up the view.
Chainsaw gardening brings out the sort of primeval man in me. I just love it.
Clearing laurels, which can grow taller than a house, is no mean feat. Best to call in the professionals, unless you have the right chainsaw training and safety gear like Ross. Llanover has a fascinating background and is such a treasure for future generations. Yet it's also a living, breathing, growing garden, constantly changing, whilst respecting its rich historic roots. Soon it will change again, these bare branches flushed with the colours of spring. Spring has arrived at Llanover, and with it, a welcome wave of milder weather, allowing the local stonemason to repair the winter's damage to the stream. All around the gardens, new life is burgeoning.
Really, springtime is all about what is coming through for the first time this year. The first flowers, the first buds. And every time I walk around the garden, I notice something out in flower for the first time.
At the garden's entrance, spring treats greet visitors. Beneath the sweet chestnuts, wildflowers are encouraged, including wood anemones, bluebells, primroses and cuckoo flower, all peeping through the grass, set off by these eye-catching red shine tulips.
We like the idea of having a good red, a rich red, and I also wanted just one colour. I love Dutch gardens or tulip gardens, but I felt in here there'd be more impact from lots of a single coloured tulip. This spring's certainly been earlier, after a very sort of wet and long winter. When the sunshine did arrive, it's really been very warm during the days, cold at night, and that has really brought forward the tulips. And indeed, so the house martins down at the house, they're a week earlier than normal.
Elizabeth's herbaceous borders are in on the act as well, bursting with spring colour. Stealing the show behind the round garden is a beautiful tree peony, Paeonia Duchess of Kent. With its voluptuous blooms like a can-can dancer's skirt, you'd be forgiven for suspecting that this showy shrub might be a bit of a prima donna. In fact, planted in the right spot, in sunny, fertile, well-drained soil, tree peonies are tough and long-lived. They do benefit from protection from the wind, and the sheltering wall of the round garden provides just that, their warm brick making a perfect backdrop. For any gardener, the excitement of seeing all this vibrant new growth goes hand in hand with plenty of hard graft. Nick, now in his third season here, is making rustic plant supports for the delphiniums, using the very same willow stems he cut in winter to make hoops attached to poles of hazel.
As the plants grow up, this will lend them support to stop them falling forward and interfering with other plants in the border. And that way, when you see them, when you come along the path from either direction, the plants will be stood up in a way that you can see them shown off to their best advantage. It's lovely to be able to reuse things that you've cut off. It's always good in the garden to sort of think forward to what you're doing. The circles are just an easy shape with willow. There's some flex in them, but not a huge amount. And that way, they will move ever so slightly, but they will still lend a great deal of support to the plants.
At this time of year, the fresh shoots of summer are beginning to show in the round garden, bringing the promise of summer. But close by is another project that just says spring. Behind the walls of the round garden, Elizabeth is creating a jewelled lawn using wildflowers and spring bulbs.
About 13 years ago, this was just a mass of sort of shrubs, cotoneaster and the like. And so we removed those shrubs, put them elsewhere in the garden, and thought, what next? And I'd heard about this idea of a jewelled lawn. I think a jewelled lawn is sort of a bit of grass with lots of sort of little pops of colour coming up through it. So, the dandelion fits in quite well, but also the little tulip, primroses, violets.
Plug plants and spring bulbs can create a surprisingly low-maintenance lawn with beautiful splashes of spring colour. No need to get the mower out every weekend, just let them all die back. Once annuals have set seed and bulbs re-energise themselves, then's the time to cut your lawn, and that random jewel pattern will continue to evolve.
I think it definitely works in smaller lawns, as long as whoever looks on the lawn appreciates the slight wildness of it. I like the difference in the contrast, and it's an experimental area.
Innovation runs through these historic gardens like the stream within them. What creative delights will await me at the height of summer? Llanover abounds with colour, and needless to say, I'm longing to be back amongst the exciting plants and remarkable features as they bask in the glorious summer sun. In autumn, the upper arboretum was awash with mellow golds and russets. Now trees and shrubs are green and pastel hues abound in this splendid grove of hydrangeas. These colours are absolutely glowing, and the fresh flowers all over these beautiful shrubs, wandering right into the distance. I love hydrangeas. They're extremely popular shrubs, and no wonder. Providing they can get ample moisture, which of course they can here, they absolutely thrive. They're hugely easy to grow. Now, all these are cultivars of one group of hydrangeas, Hydrangea macrophylla. But it's a bit confusing because within that group there are two sorts. There are those great mop heads with those huge bunches of flowers, and then there are these, which are lace caps, much more elegant. And lace cap perfectly describes these flowers. Well, where I live now in Devon, they call these plants changeables, and that's because you do get this variety of colour, and it's all dependent on the soil conditions underneath. On alkaline soils with lots of chalk or lime in them, they tend to be pink. On acid soils, they tend to be blue. And here, where 200 years of landscaping has left who knows what buried treasures in the soil beneath them, it creates a spectrum of colour, all within one swathe of plants. It makes this great, long, wandering river right the way through here, alongside the stream. It's lovely. The upper arboretum has a soothing atmosphere, and the stream seems to agree. No longer the roaring beast of winter, it's a gentle creature now, accompanying you placidly around the grounds. In summer, they're the picture of pastoral elegance. I've caught up with Elizabeth and Ross for a tour of the parklands.
Benjamin Waddington bought the Welsh farmhouse and then added the rather smart front that we can see and enjoy today in about 1790.
So it was quite a thing, wasn't it, for Waddington to build here, and he was very influenced by the ideas of the times from Capability Brown. Lancelot Capability Brown was the name in landscape architecture in Waddington's day, popularising the English landscape style, an idealised vision of nature which set out to blur the boundaries between the garden and its surrounds.
Well, Benjamin Waddington would have certainly known about him, read about him, and possibly even seen some of the fabulous landscapes that he made. He believed in borrowing the landscape and therefore used the ha-ha, or created a ha-ha, so that from the front door of the house you could just enjoy the view.
So a ha-ha, just for those of us who don't know, is where you actually create quite a sharp, steep bank, but it can't be seen from the house because you see down the slope and across to the landscape beyond, and it just looks continuous.
And it's sort of called ha-ha because it's sort of ha-ha, deceived you. You thought it was all one great big flowing landscape, but in fact there's this ditch in between.
It has the other advantage of stopping the sheep and cattle from actually coming up and joining in the fun in your perennial garden.
Yes, I mean, occasionally they manage to get through a fence on the side. But yes, maybe they took the soil from the ha-ha to create the slope. And so you'll see that soil has been piled up to set the house up.
The sort of version nowadays would be digging out a pond, wouldn't it, and creating a rockery. But it's on rather a grander scale.
What you see from here is the continuity of planting. So different types of trees, different species and different ages. So they've been planted over 200 years continuously, which is what makes a park so interesting. It's just a continual process of renewal.
Even the most historic garden needs renewal in order to flourish. Ross's chainsaw massacre of the overgrowth in winter has cleared the way for fresh new planting, and head gardener Nick hasn't been resting on his laurels either. When I first visited in autumn, the bog garden was new on the agenda. Now in summer, Nick's filled some of the gaps. But the project's by no means complete.
That's a pretty thankless task, isn't it?
It never ends.
No, the first time I met you,
Yeah.
in fact, the only time I met you before you just started. And how have you found it?
Oh, fabulous. It's been interesting. I've seen a lot. The garden's changed a lot.
Yeah.
So now we can sort of start making inroads and make plans for the future.
Well, it's looking brilliant. Was this always a beautiful bog garden?
No, it was once a swimming pool.
Oh, was it?
And then a stream was run through here,
Yeah.
rerouted,
Yes.
and then a bog garden created.
A bog garden only works on soggy ground, but that doesn't mean you need to reroute a stream to create one. Perforated compost bags will do the job, lined with a bit of gravel to keep your soil moist without it becoming stagnant. Filled with earth, there's an exciting range of bog plants to adorn it with, from the distinctive foliage of Hosta and Armira, the umbrella plant, to the vibrant flowers of purple loosestrife.
Elizabeth loves the phormium, the New Zealand flax, and so I think we're going to divide that before it gets any bigger.
It's huge, but it is loving living there, isn't it?
So we try things in certain places, and we wouldn't normally try phormium in a bog garden. It would be an unusual place to
Yeah.
put it, but it ended up there and it's working. A lot of this garden will be experimentation, and I think that's the main part of gardening, isn't it? It's the fun part. Enjoying what other people have foreseen and planned and worked many, many years on to get the way they wanted it and to get their vision put into the garden.
Right.
And then my job is to keep the garden moving forward and evolving and developing.
Next, I'll be visiting another of the garden's more recent developments, the round garden, which is looking superb. In Llanover Gardens, each generation has added to the treasures of the past, and one of Elizabeth's key contributions is in the round garden. Now, in summer, it's putting on an electrifying display of colour.
It looks magnificent. You know, I was last here in this garden in the autumn and it was mellow and soft and now it's just transformed. That's moonfire, yeah?
That is moonfire, which is without doubt one of the best dahlias if you like bright yellow and red. When shown against the black foliage, it really sings out.
It glows, doesn't it? It really does.
And so much flower on it,
Yeah.
and really easy to care for. I mean, bearing in mind that this garden was planted with a brief maximum effect for minimum effort, most of these plants are meant to sort of be hardy throughout the year. You know, moonfire's got a will to live,
Yeah.
and to flower. So I help her along a little bit just with all the deadheading.
I think people often forget, maybe, just why you deadhead. Because the minute a flower has actually set seed, then it stops trying, doesn't it? But if you keep taking those old flowers off, it keeps carrying on.
It really does sort of pay dividends with this moonfire and also with some of the salvias.
Everything here looks as happy as can be. It really looks brilliant.
Garden here, I felt sort of slightly overwhelmed when I moved in 1999 with sort of 3 young children and taking over from my father, who had done so much of the planning here since the late 1950s. He's a big man, knew his trees, passionate about them. In fact, became president of the RHS, as you know, you knew him. And I thought, oh, goodness, where can I make my mark? And it was on the herbaceous side that I thought I can really try and improve it. And that has been great fun. What I love particularly about the perennials and herbaceous is that it brings enjoyment to so many people. They may have no garden, they may just have a window box or a lovely old rectory garden, but there's always some plant or colour combination that they can take back and relate to their element of gardening.
delightful borders in the round garden. Everything mixes and mingles so beautifully. It blends together. And then every so often you come across one plant that's a real standalone. And this is just such a plant. This is Lobelia tupa, originally from Chile. But it looks a picture against this brick pillar. The colour blends so perfectly. And when you look at it, it's got so much about it that's different with these strange elongated petals. In its native Chile, it's pollinated by hummingbirds who've got this long tongue which can penetrate deep into the flower and extract the nectar. Well, it's got a common name too, or a vernacular name, and it's devil's tobacco, because apparently these lovely soft grey leaves, when they're rolled up and smoked, actually are hallucinogenic. I've never tried it myself, I'm not about to, but I do think the whole plant is sort of out of this world.
The story here is one of progress, from Waddington's grand plan for the landscape to Robin's trees and now Elizabeth's perennials. Driving it all is a deep love of these grounds, carried forward by each successive generation.
Elizabeth's father, Robin, has been so good. He has not once criticised a tree that he had planted being taken out, and he has so loved seeing Elizabeth take on his garden.
We moved here sort of over 20 years ago, and at the time, with 3 young children, I remember thinking, my goodness, what have we taken on? But the overriding sort of wish is that, and feeling, is that we're sort of custodians. It's a wonderful sort of environment, but it's our responsibility.
I get the feeling it's a very welcome one.
It's a huge pleasure.
That's right.
This time last summer, I'd never set foot in these gardens. What a privilege to have come to know them over the course of a year and witness their unique charm.
Llanover's by no means a well-known garden, but when I first visited here way back in the autumn, I was completely bowled over, both by the scale of the place, by these huge trees, and by the diversity here.
It's rare to find a garden with such an unbroken pedigree, passed down through the same family for nearly 300 years.
Throughout the centuries, each generation has built on the past. But through every twist and turn, there's been huge respect for this place and the willingness to make it evolve. Llanover is truly a jewel in Wales's crown and a great British garden.
Thank you.